Okay, so I don't, hang on, let me say okay to that. Okay, so I don't have to tell you guys how important and potentially church changing this process of synodality could be. I'm going to have to admit that in the beginning, I was a little underwhelmed with a synod on synodality. It seemed like a process about a process. It seemed not that exciting to me, but I have changed my view, and I believe that this can be very significant and impactful for the church, but it certainly is news. What I've learned is there are a couple problems with the newsworthiness of this, and after we go through our presentation today, you may see that the term synod is a little bit jargony, and the whole process is a little bit insider baseball for people who are not what I sometimes call professional Catholics. But I think despite those issues, there is a chance for, I mean, the whole idea of the synod is to bring voices to the public square, or to bring everyone's voice to the conversation. So we're going to talk today about how to use media to bring your voices as academics into the public square on this issue. So just an overview about how we'll spend our time together. I'm going to do a little bit of talk about our process in the news media and how that goes. Some of you already have some experience in writing for news media. And then I'll give some writing tips about how to write for a broader audience as opposed to an academic audience. And then what I had hoped to do, and we'll have some time, is to even just sort of workshop some ideas. And a couple people shared those in advance, so I'm all ready to talk about those, but I'm also willing to take your questions and ideas. And of course, after this program is over, you'll all have my email, so you can contact me directly with your ideas as well. So inside the news business, I don't know how many of you are watching the morning show. I'm a little belated to this. My husband and I just started the second season. And I will tell you that working in the news media is exciting, although luckily for me, not this exciting. So if you're watching this show, it's all about sexual harassment and is very heavy in many ways. But I think that a couple things that strike me about the show is that it does demonstrate how fast-paced things are in most media, and that just has gotten crazier with social media. And it's very competitive. There's that. And it does require teamwork. So while you may watch a TV show and think that the people who are on camera are doing it all, there's a whole team behind everybody that makes the publication or the media happen. So that's where the similarities maybe end, though. So let me make a couple points. First of all, the phrase "content is king," I think Bill Gates is the person who popularized this, is the idea that, I will say journalists used to kind of bristle at this idea of things being content. So we're journalists, we do news, we don't do content. Content was kind of a marketing term. But I think a number of journalists have adopted this phrase, in part because it focuses on what's so important. So we're in the business of delivering information to an audience. So you have the delivery, you have the information, you have the audience. And what this phrase says is it's the information that's the most important. And so, publishers are always looking for good content. We publish at NCR 6 days a week, not on Sunday. And we generally have 4 to 5 pieces of original content, usually written stories. And that's in addition to anywhere from 4 to up, sometimes as many as 10 wire stories. So Religion News Service, Associated Press, and what used to be Catholic News Service is now OSV News Service. Those are stories that are already written and edited that we just post. We have a couple other small international news services. But of that original content, the four or 5 pieces of content that we publish every day, at least one is from a freelancer. So while we have staff reporters and staff opinion writers, we run a lot of freelance stuff. So reported stuff and opinion. I was looking at today's homepage, and not only are 2 of the 4 stories written by non-staff people. We have an example this morning of a piece written by an academic as our hero or main story. So it's by Jim Keenan from Boston College. And it's a piece he worked on with me because he wanted to respond to the conversation about radical inclusion that Bishop or Cardinal McElroy has initiated. And he did so by bringing his expertise about the history of sexual ethics. So we can talk a little bit more about how I worked with him on that, but you can see that we're always looking for academics to add their voices to the conversation. So on the outside, it might seem like, oh, it's hard to get published. In secular media, there are admittedly fewer slots or space for these things in their print publications or in their online media, but they're there and they're always looking for good stuff. So believe it or not, you hold a lot of cards because you have the good stuff, right? And if you can work with and be willing to adapt your way of presenting your opinions, your material to a broader news media, many of them will be dying to have you. So let's talk about how that happens. So pitching is the way you kind of get your foot in the door at news media. So the gist of it is that a team of editors decides what's going to be in that media. We have 7 editors at NCR now. I've really built our team of staff there. There's myself, a managing editor, a news editor, an Earthbeat editor who covers environmental justice, spirituality and culture editor, Global Sisters Report editor, and a digital editor. So there's 7 of us that together every day make the decision about what to run, both online and in print. First and foremost, we're paying attention to the news. So what's happened, what is happening, what's going to happen today, what is everybody talking about? Sadly, today that is school shootings. Now, a number of the things that we run are more evergreen, but those often have to be shuffled around what's happening in the news. And even the evergreen things usually respond to something that is of interest or in some way newsy for us. So who writes this content? Again, we have staff reporters and columnists, and they often have first dibs, and their content will move the most quickly through our editing process. But we also have a level of contributors who are sort of regular. Either they've written for us before, or they even have a title of contributor at NCR. In secular papers, you have columnists who write, once a week or, twice a week. And then you have people who have a relationship with an editor and so frequently write for a publication, even if they don't have a title. And then there are people who've never written for us before, who we may know or we may not know. And pitching is the way that they let us know that they might be a good person to write for us. And everyone pitches, including the staff people. So, staff people can just call me or have a conversation with me, but I still get a pitch from them before I greenlight a piece they're going to work on. So if you're a new writer, the way you pitch is to send an email, basically a letter. And what you want to do is outline 3 things very quickly. Your topic that you want to write about, why you're qualified to write it, and what your timeline would be in terms of how quickly you could get this. And I think I have in another slide, we do have some pitching guidelines on our website, and I'll show you that link that kind of get into detail about how you shouldn't pitch to more than 1 publication at a time, how normally it can take up to 2 weeks to hear back from an editor. We put that on the long side just to cover ourselves. You should hear back more quickly. Under the topic of your qualifications, obviously you would mention how you maybe are studying this, you have academic degrees, but I would note that in this day and age, all publications and all media, including NCR, are trying to have more diversity of voices in their publication. So any way that you could represent that you bring a diverse voice. It can be anything from race or gender or ethnicity or experiences. I'm looking less at whether you're sort of biological pedigree, but their experiences. So if you're a Latina and you have studied, theology of, Latinx theology, that would be of interest to me. I'm actually looking for geographic diversity as well as a national publication. We have a lot of folks in the Midwest and the East Coast who are part of our legacy, but I am looking to expand writers on the West Coast and in the Southwest, since that is where our church is growing. So I'm really excited there's so many West Coast people here today. Generally, if you're a new writer, we generally ask people to pitch first before writing the piece. But if you're a new writer, you already have it written or mostly written, it can be helpful to send that along, because if I don't have examples of your writing from before, you may have a great idea, but I need to see if you're kind of up to the task of putting it together. If not, sometimes an editor will accept things on spec, meaning, yes, I like your idea, go ahead with it. But once it comes in, I still have the right to decline it. That doesn't happen very often, because we partly see it as our ministry to work with writers to try to get pieces into a shape that we can publish. The idea of accepting on spec is usually for bigger publications, and the idea is they don't pay you for the piece. At that point, we tend to pay people for things, even if for some reason we don't publish them, but we also don't pay a lot, so it's not as painful. I would say if you've submitted a pitch to an editor, you need to be somewhat patient, in that editors get, dozens, if not more, of these per day, and often are busy responding to immediate news. But also, if you haven't heard from someone fairly quickly, especially if your piece is very newsworthy, it's also okay to follow up. As a person who gets approximately 200 emails a day, it's true that I do miss some. So that's the pitch letter. It's the basic way of communicating with somebody at the publication to see if they might be open to publishing something from you. At bigger publications, it might not always be clear who you should send that pitch to, but usually if you dig around on the website, that's pretty, they often have some sort of general email where you send it, and someone kind of lower on the totem pole will sort through them and find the ones that they think are potential, and then forward those to an editor. The better way to pitch is to have a relationship with an editor already, which many of you already maybe do, and some of you already have with me, because we've met at a conference, or now we're meeting through this event, which is great. So the importance of working with editors, like any working relationship, it's a relationship and it's built on trust. So the editor has to trust the writer, and the writer has to trust the editor. So person that you pitch to and who will work with you on your piece is usually called a commissioning editor. That is the person who is deciding that your content is somehow going to get in the publication. And then the editing process, generally, at least I can speak about, I've worked at a daily, a weekly, and a monthly. And now NCR is we run twice a month in print, and we run 6 days a week online. But generally, once you pitch, the editor will give you the go-ahead, give you the details about length, payment, etc. Deadline, which is an important one. Maybe give you some ideas like don't get into this, angle, because we have somebody else writing about that, or will in general kind of help you with how to angle the piece. And then once you've written it, you will submit it usually directly to that commissioning editor, who gives it a first read and will give you some feedback like, looks good, I've only made some small style editing. Or if they have questions, doing fact checking, they might have some follow-up questions, or they may give you more general feedback like, this is too long, we really need to figure out how we might narrow this a little bit more. So that's the first round of editing. The second round then is that they would give that back to you. You would answer the questions, make revisions, and resubmit to the editor. Moving towards doing all of this on Google Docs so that we don't have a lot of different versions floating around. We can keep them all in one Google document. And at that point, then the editor will read it again and be like, this looks great. I'm going to move this on to be ready for scheduling. So every day, this team of 7 editors, we meet and decide what we're going to run that day and the next day. And we look at the things that are all ready and we decide to move them up, on our list about what's going to get published and when, and a lot of different considerations go into making those decisions. So once it's scheduled, it'll go to copy editing, where another editor who is specifically looking for, factual and stylistic issues will give it one more read. And then we'll prepare it for publishing, which includes working with photos, graphics, full quotes, all that kind of stuff, social media, scheduling tweets, all that kind of stuff. So again, that's our process. And on a very quick day, I could tell you someone like Christopher White, our Vatican correspondent, who's a very quick writer, could see something, write up a 500-word story. I'll edit it, maybe even post it and have the copy editor read behind it because it's super newsy. Sometimes all that can happen in a half an hour. For a freelance writer, these things generally take several days, if not a week at least. So that's our timeline. And then certain things do take longer. The importance of social media. So let's say you've gone through all this and you've done this, gotten your piece published. It doesn't end there. You want it to be read, not just published. So we very much pay attention to analytics about who's clicking on, how much time they spend on stories. And the writer can really help in terms of disseminating your piece so that it gets read by more and more people, and especially in different audiences. So we use social media, we use e-newsletters, the way we write headlines and do keywording helps with online search. These are the main ways that people see our content, in addition to the people who just visit our website regularly. But the writer can help with that too. And so if you have some social media accounts and following there, especially related to your topic, you can be sharing on social media. You could be using your university PR people who might bring attention to the fact that you published this piece in some sort of way. And this can happen, the day it's published, but also even down the line, if your piece is somewhat evergreen and the issue, becomes in the news down, at a later date. It also helps if you have good multimedia skills, you're good at on camera, you know how to create a Instagram reel. These are all things I've had to learn over the last couple of years as writing is only one way that we communicate now. So all of these things will endear you to your editor and make it possible for you to do things like, live video events or be a guest on a podcast, these sorts of things. So I'm trying to move through this quickly. So we will have some time for questions, but that's the gist of the procedure: is have something good to say, pitch it in a concise way that is attractive to news media, be patient, but and have some understanding of the editing process, and then help us disseminate this to as many people as possible once it's published. Here is how to write for NCR, is where I said there's more details about how to pitch to us, especially if you're a new writer. All of you now have a connection to me and you can pitch directly to me if you'd like, but normally if you're, Joe Schmo and you just want to say something, we have these sort of guidelines. You can Google how to write for NCR and this will come up. It's kind of buried at the bottom of our website. All right, so you have an assignment and now you're sitting down to write for NCR or a more general audience. What I'm really loving, I've been in media for, well, too long to admit, almost 30 years. But what I'm really liking is I'm seeing more and more people in academia who have some expertise and at least openness to trying to write for a broader audience. This idea of public theology, of bringing your voice beyond the academic sphere. So I love to work with academics on that. And, it is a different way of writing. And as someone who, I don't have a PhD, but I have a master's, so I'm somewhat familiar with academic writing. It's just two different ways of writing. And so I'll give you some tips about how to do that. So the first tip is to have something to say. And this one's pretty easy. So you all, I think, bring a lot of either experiences, expertise, research. You are deep in the weeds on some of these topics every day. So you guys already have that. So it helps to think about what is it that I'm most interested in or passionate about or have the most expertise about, to think about. And specifically today, we're talking about obviously women in the church. So the second thing is to pay attention to news values. So this is what we do here for you, but if you're aware of it in the back of your mind, it might help you. So I just briefly put down the 7 news values I used to teach in my class. Novelty, that's the whole man bites dog thing, right? Like it's not news when a dog bites a man, but it's news when a man bites a dog. Prominence, dog bites a famous person. So like anybody who's a prominent person is more newsworthy than someone who isn't. Timeliness is very important in terms of like, this is happening right now, or it's about to happen. It's an anniversary of something. It's a holiday. Proximity means it happened nearby. This is less of an issue for us because we're a national and an international publication. Impact is about not only either it affects a lot of people, so it has a broad impact, or it affects maybe a smaller number of people, but in a very significant way. So specifically, the issue of women's roles is part of synodality, and synodality is affecting people in the church. Human interest is kind of a way of saying that even if something is less newsy, if it really appeals to emotions and the human condition, it can be of interest to media. And then there's the one of conflict, which I can't tell you how many times I hear from people about how they wish there wasn't so much conflict in news media, but conflict is kind of part of the definition of what makes something newsy. You know, 2 or more people disagreeing about something. There is a movement in journalism called solutions journalism, which aims to highlight things that offer solutions to a problem. So they still have conflict because there's still some sort of issue, but their goal is to not just lay out the issue, but to also offer a solution. So, but of course, and I think that we have done a number of projects with the Solutions Journalism Network, specifically around environmental justice. But the reality is, how many of you, read a story last night or saw some consumed some media about the school shooting? There's conflict there. And how many of you read, a feature story about some cool program at a school that's working well on, violence or some other issue? Now, that kind of solutions journalism would be newsy on a day like today. But in general, people are less likely to read those pieces, which doesn't mean we shouldn't do them, but they don't always rise to the top of our front page. The big 3 for us, or for most places, are timeliness, conflict, and impact. So if you have 1 or all 3 of those and can highlight that in your pitch or in your writing, that would be helpful. So often, if you're trying to angle your piece, you want to highlight that. And when we go through some of the workshopping, some of these ideas, I can talk a little more about that. And then the other major difference between academic writing and journalistic writing, academic writing has its particularities in terms of the need for precision, the need for depth, and the writing of topic sentences and then evidence and concluding sentences, the need for lit review. In journalistic writing, it's all about getting to the point very quickly and very succinctly and right at the top. So journalists spend a lot of time paying attention to the lead or the first paragraph or 2. Sometimes a straightforward news lead just kind of says it, 6 people were killed in a school shooting yesterday at such and such school, who, what, when, where, why. Even in an opinion essay, you probably would, attract the reader's attention, maybe with some sort of anecdote or fact. But pretty quickly in the first graph or 2, you want to get to the gist or the nut graph of the story that says, here's why I'm writing about this, and here's why it's important, and here's the gist of what I'm going to say. Often academics write like this way. They say a lot of things, and then at the end they make their conclusion. And I often have to take that and put it way at the top. The assumption is, or the motivating thing for journalists is the assumption that people don't have to read what you're writing. So in an academic situation, either this, article has been assigned to a student and they have to read it, or they're supposed to read it, or you're another academic who really needs to know this material, so you slog through it whether you're enjoying it or not. In journalistic writing, click, they leave you, or they don't even click on you, or they read the first 2 paragraphs and then they go read something else. So we're always working to keep the reader's attention, and that's pretty foremost in our mind. So you want to very quickly, and the Jim Keenan piece is a perfect example. He had written this wonderful piece about the history of sexual ethics, full of all kinds of things that I never knew. And then kind of at the end, he alluded to the fact that some bishops are discussing this these days. And I was like, no, we need to be much more straightforward about that. And he added a paragraph right at the top that we mentioned McElroy and all these issues. Once you get past the lead, you also will be using examples and evidence, but we cite that differently in journalistic writing. So we don't use footnotes. We tend to use links to articles. We use attribution, either direct quotes from people, so-and-so said, or a reference as so-and-so wrote in such and such, and then we link to it and use the direct quote. And just in general, try to avoid jargon and academic language. We do a lot of trimming of words that aren't necessary. Back in the day when things had to be fit into a small news story, every little word counted. So if you say in order to do something, I'll take the in order out and say just to do something. So you do the best you can with that, but then you can also trust your editor to help you with that. At NCR, the average essay, I think on our guidelines, it says 700 to 1200 words. I don't get too many that are 700 words, but I generally give 1200 words as a rough estimate. You can go longer, upwards of 1800 words is acceptable. Jim Keenan's piece was 2000 words. And when I offered some feedback to him on the second round of edits, he cut another 50 words out for me because he knows that I like that. So that's a little bit about how to do the some writing tips. So I don't know if I want to take questions yet, or should I go to some of the examples with the workshopping? Maureen, do you have a thought? Or do people have questions? Oh, I see things in the chat, but I need to escape, I think.
Yeah, the chat is not questions. It's just me kind of offering links to things that you were mentioning.
Okay, good.
How about if we just really quickly see if there's a technical or clarifying question, and then we could jump into the workshopping that I think will also answer sort of bigger questions. But is there a technical or anything? Mary Ann, it looks like Mary Ann has a question.
Yeah, you used the phrase evergreen to talk about what I think you meant. It's like something that it's timely whenever.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what evergreen is?
Yeah. So for example, women's ordination is evergreen for us at NCR. We're always open to stories about, the role of women, and in part because other Catholic media, sometimes refuse to cover or don't cover well some of these issues. That said, it's always more newsy if it's in the news for some reason. Bad homilies, or the need for improvement of homilies. Every Sunday we hear one. So that's a topic we can run anytime. And if that's your interest, we might accept that because we think, oh yeah, that's always of interest to people. But, then if things happen and there's lots of news going on, it might get held for a while. So that's what I would mean by evergreen. The Synod is somewhat evergreen now. It's just part of how we're being church. But that said, we got this big meeting coming up in Rome in October. We have of the continental phase, and my understanding is that the continental reports are due Thursday. So there are news hooks even to the Synod, even as the synodal process becomes an evergreen topic.
That's great. It looks like Cecilia has a question.
Yeah, you alluded to this, Heidi, right now, in that the pre-thinking about something that's going to happen and having it ready. I mean, we worked on the memorial for John August Swanson because we knew he was on the last stages of his life, right? So I think that's also a helpful way for us to think of things and have them ready to go when the thing hits.
Yes. So, obituaries are the one place that news media do this, and it's sometimes disconcerting for people outside the news media to think that we're preparing obits of people who are, even healthy because they're prominent. So, for example, every major newspaper in America has an obit or, President Biden, just because he's the president of the United States. I would like to say that we're better prepared on advanced planning, and sometimes we're not, in part because we do have a pretty bare bones staff. But with obituaries, we do advanced planning. I can tell you when Pope Emeritus Benedict died, that story was not only written, it was done, it was on the page. All I had to do was press publish. So, that's one area. But other areas might be, for example, the synodal meeting in Rome coming up in October. And we would particularly be looking for, we'll be covering the events on the ground there. We'll have a number of people there in addition to our Vatican correspondent, but we will definitely be looking for background pieces in the lead up to that.
Good.
Planning ahead.
Awesome. So that's something for us to be thinking about.
Yeah.
So why don't we jump into a couple of we're grateful to people who submitted some possible pitches.
Yes, and I'm going to, I
You
put
learn
them
from.
on. I'm doing this correctly here. Okay, so sample pitch 1 here. Oops, there we go. And I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but just to say that this person was pitching a piece about the connection between looking at mandatory celibacy in the priesthood and women in women's ordination. And the argument, I think I highlighted it here in yellow, is that, or in red, was that a return to optional celibacy without also looking at women's ordination, would have some positive effect, but that it's not the best solution. And one way that I often think about pitches like this, if you're a good person at summarizing or writing pithy headlines, you can always suggest a headline to your piece, but I try to think about what would the headline to this be? And is it something that would be, people will click on, married priests are great, but it won't work without women, something along that line is a headline that I would think of for a piece like this. So my first thought is that this is a great pitch, and I think that it's something we would be interested in. But my first thought was I wonder if it's newsy. And so I was like, did the Pope say something recently about celibacy and priesthood? I can't remember. So I Googled. Yes, the Pope did. And actually, we didn't even have the story. Apparently, just a couple days ago, he hinted in an interview with somebody. He's always given an interview to somebody. He hinted at ending celibacy for priests. And interestingly, in this Google search, you can see the Catholic News Agency owned by EWTN. Their headline was, no, he really didn't hint that. So there you have conflict right away. It's that he said something that apparently was perceived in a different way by two different groups of people. So, again, women's roles in the church is always a go-to for us. This angle, would have been great around the time of the Amazon Synod when we were very much discussing the possibility of optional celibacy. Making that timeliness connection would help with your pitch. Maybe engaging with the conflict here a little bit could also help. I think that this is an idea that has potential. So two issues that are of interest to our readers, and connecting them and making an argument. So this is good, but we need to connect these two things. So that's my gist. I think that's a good idea. I also had a question here, and maybe this, again, I'm not saying who these things came from, but it might be obvious. Oh no, I'm sorry, sample pitch 2. We'll get to the question second. Here's the second pitch that Maureen shared with me, was this idea of looking at synodality and the importance for diverse voices. So they're saying race, class, education, language, ethnicity, immigration status, and how this article would look at engagement with people from the peripheries and what some of their surprising results are when that happens. Again, this is an idea that looks very interesting to me. I already mentioned this, the importance of diverse voices in our publication. And so this would be a way to bring some of those voices even as a group, not just the writer, but they're talking about diverse voices. That said, this pitch raises questions. So before I would say yes to this one, I'd say, what are those surprising results? I'd want to know more about I think I don't know what the headline would be to this. it would be, we need diverse voices in the synod, or if we invite, you know, this group to, we need more of this in the synod, and if we do, this would happen. So I would probably respond to this person and ask a few questions, and based on that, say, yeah, that is pretty interesting, and I would love a piece about that as well. This raises the issue of whether someone who's doing opinion pieces would actually interview other people. So generally, an opinion piece is not a reported piece, in that your examples might come from written things or come from your own research. But some opinion people do interviews with other, like, everyday folks or other experts, and just working with an editor to make sure that you're doing those interviews in a way that fit our journalistic standards. So when we quote people and put things in direct quotes, it has to be exactly what they said. So it would raise that issue if you were going to include those voices in this piece. But again, a very important angle, not specific to women, but even if it just looked at women and the need for diverse voices from women. These pitches, I'm sorry, I left your name on here, Maureen. There were 2 pitches from Maureen. And here you did, and succinct is always good. The future of Catholic higher education. I can't see this. It depends on Catholic colleges and universities embracing the spirit and methods of synodality. Again, I love that idea. I haven't seen a lot of reporting or opinion about that. In fact, Maureen and I have been in conversation about some of the work that she's doing on college campuses with synodal gatherings, and how that's something that NCR would like to report on. Sometimes we like to have the reporting first and then the opinion piece. And synodality has latent anti-racist possibilities, and could address white supremacy, but we need to cultivate them. Again, this connection with diversity issues would be great. A little bit of, I was going to note back here, a little bit of jargon. I think our average reader has more education than a reader of the Chicago Tribune. So I learned in journalism school, I'd been told both to write for a 4th grade audience, or sometimes they said a 7th grade audience. The assumption was that people who read your stuff are not people with higher education necessarily, or advanced degrees. At NCR, we do surveys of our folks, and people do have advanced degrees, many of our readers, but we're also trying to reach general younger audiences online. So we do try to avoid too much academese. Decentering and intersectional sounds a little academic to me. I wouldn't necessarily take it out, but in general, we try to avoid too much academic stuff. And then this was a question about, and I found this very interesting because it's about this issue of part of deacon formation, how the candidates get the lector and acolyte process, whatever we call this, and yet the women who go through this process, we all know, don't get to become deacons at the end yet, could be going through this mid-process, right? Because Pope Francis has now opened the lector and acolyte thing to women, or to all baptized. And this person is asking a question saying, I want to approach my bishop and I want to talk to the women in the program, but how can I get some broader data about this? How can I get think tanks to want to do research about this? I don't know the answer to that question, although they're usually interested in newsy things, like we are. But I will say this is a great story idea. And I have actually heard from one bishop who is wanting to move forward with this in his diocese. And he wanted NCR to do a story about why nobody else is doing this, because he's having a hard time doing it on his own. And I went back to him, I'm like, why don't you write a piece for me that says, hey, bishops, you need to do this. And he declined to do that right now. But this is a great story idea. And if this person does talk to the women in the diaconate formation program, I could either assign a story to a reporter, or I would love to hear from this person writing about that. This brings up the issue of, even if you don't want to write a piece, you can put your voice into media by being a source in a reported piece. So one way that happens is just by getting to know editors. Maybe you've written for us before. Our reporters have lists of sources, and you can see probably over time how they go back to the same people over and over. Why is that? The people get back to them quickly, and they give them a quotable, answer. We try to do justice to the complexity of what you might tell the reporter, but in the end, the reporter only has so many words to include a number of folks and their viewpoints in it. But for example, this piece on the acolyte issue, maybe you don't write about it, but I say, now that I'm planning to do a story on this because of my previous conversation with this bishop. And maybe and now I have in the back of my mind, although everything we're saying here today is off the record until you tell me it's okay to use it, that maybe this person who sent this question in might be a good person to report its story. So I tried to go through those very quickly to leave a little time at the end, and
Great.
probably didn't do justice to the depth with which they were proposed and the time I would give them if they were emailed to me. But in the interest of time, I just tried to give a quick off the top of my head response. So now we have a little time for more questions or ideas if people would like to ask them.
Yeah, Naomi, go ahead.
So my campuses are really supportive of publishing through the conversation. And I'm wondering, is there a way to partner with NCR or with other Catholic media on those kinds of articles or that kind of writing? Or is there a way maybe to think about, if we're writing some piece for the conversation, to then have some different approach or different angle for one of the Catholic news media? So it's just generally
Are you talking about the New York Times?
No, the group, the conversation, the actual organization, the conversation.
Which I don't
That
know.
is,
Okay.
do you not know who they are? Let me find their
Is that the
website.
Jesuit? Is that the Jesuit periodical that comes out?
No, it's a big international group that tries to get scholars to write for public audiences in
Oh,
all
okay.
different disciplines, not just in religion.
Oh, kind of like the what's it called project? What's that called? The other one?
Like the op-ed project. but
Op-ed project,
Catholics.
yes.
Yeah. Interesting. I've never heard of it. Yeah, Naomi, if you could find a link, that'd be great.
They will also cross-post things in this thing from academics. I've heard this. That's a good idea, Naomi.
So in general, we don't publish things that have been published elsewhere, in part because when something's published online, it's kind of out there. And so, it's not our preference, I guess I would say. But you're very right, Naomi, in pointing out that, and freelance writers do this all the time, you could have a really good story idea and you change it up for different audiences, right? And so I do know that we run all of our stories through, we do a lot of editing, but we run them all through an anti-plagiarism checker, as faculty members, you guys all do this for your students' work too. So even if you're plagiarizing yourself, that you've written something somewhere else, that's going to come up. Sometimes we just fix that by saying, as I've written elsewhere, comma, and then put a link. So in general, we don't want you taking like huge chunks of something you've written elsewhere and dropping it in another piece. But yeah, that's a great idea. And I will look that up, the conversation.
I dropped it in the chat, the link to their website.
I have a question regarding events. So for example, not to be like pitching things now, but CTU in Chicago is hosting an event with Discerning Deacons regarding women in the diaconate, and kind of having like a prayerful pep rally to get people excited about the topic. And we were talking about who would write that. And so I wondered if it was an ethical, like, no for somebody who's actually like sponsoring the event to write about it, or if it would be better if it would be somebody else that's outside of the event that can come in and we can ask them to write about it.
So you're talking about after the fact, like after it happens?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I know you and I have talked about this issue already. I've actually, that's an interesting, that specific one. I've already been pitched an advanced story on that event that I believe is running in America because the person pitched it to 2 places at the same time accidentally.
I know.
And I struggled with the piece in part because there wasn't like the news value. So in general, promoting events, I mean, I have nothing against promoting events. When I wrote about, for example, the Catholic Women Preach book in my column, I mentioned that there was an event at BC coming up. That was just coincidental because I should have written that column in December when the Catholic Women Preach book came out, but I was busy with other things. But generally, we don't have enough resources to do story about in advance of people's events. And the person who was writing about it, it had potential, but I would have needed a little more of a news hook. Same with after the fact. Yeah. So if you're writing a piece and the gist of the piece is this is a great program or this is a great, thing, generally, if you work for that thing, you're not the person to write that.
Yeah. I was thinking like it would have to be a topic regarding women in the diaconate. And then like as a mention, you could say like Discerning Deacons had this event that spoke about this topic, but it wouldn't be, the event isn't the focus, the topic is.
Generally, yeah. We don't do a lot of coverage of events. So here's how we handle, especially, and I know we're getting right at the top of the hour, so I will be super succinct, but I'm also happy to stay on for a few extra minutes. If there's some sort of event, the Georgetown Catholic Initiative has so many, and over COVID, everybody got good at doing online events. So my reporters can be at all kinds of things without actually having to travel to them. Even if a reporter covers something, we aren't necessarily going to write it up unless something newsy gets said. So we'll be like, oh, this looks interesting. Oh, the people who are speaking at this thing looks interesting. You reporter, if you have time, go sit and watch this thing. And then the wait is to see if something newsy gets said. The one exception is if I come to your event, basically, because I have to write a column every 2 weeks that runs in our print edition on page 2. And, I try to do reported columns. So I try not to just opine off the top of my head, although sometimes I do that. But I try to do columns that are based in something that I have either attended or interviewed or read or something like that. So I'm planning to come to the Discerning Deacons thing. It's on my calendar. It's not 100%, but there's a possibility that I might write about it. But in general, our reporters are sitting there waiting to see, like, did somebody say something newsy? And if they did, then they'll write something up. I know all of this can sound very,
Yeah, it's interesting.
I don't know, sometimes maybe, especially like if this is not your everyday milieu that you run in, it can sound very, I don't know what the word is, cutthroat or not taking into account, the nuance of things, because you have to like be quick, you have to be fast, you have to be newsy, you're competing with other people. But unfortunately, it's just the reality of what news media has always been, and it's even more all of those things these days. And I know you all face that in your teaching, probably. You've got students who are less attentive than they used to be. So I apologize if some of it comes off, even in my presentation of it. I'm very straightforward in my own presentation and very quick as well.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. I think one of the best things about this, Heidi, is that we now have a chance to have a bit of a relationship with you, and we have put your email in the chat. And I think, we could all be thinking about something that we could be doing and sort of pitch it to you and maybe have a bit of a conversation that might assist you in knowing, okay, this piece might not be great for right now, but I now know that there are people who we could be tapping and seeding as experts. So this is just really tremendous. So thank you for taking the time on a busy day. I will be following up with everybody with the recording from today, which is a good reminder that I'm going to stop